Welcome to Timeless Religious Stories, where faith, struggle, and divine moments come to life. New stories shared daily.
My name is Father Elijah Mercer, 48 years old, ordained for 21. Pastor of St. Bartholomew's Orthodox Church, tucked away in the pine-soaked outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. I tell you this not for ceremony, but to anchor you to the bones of who I was before the veil tore. St. Bartholomew's is a modest church. White clapboard siding, red door, domed roof like a weather-worn onion. Our small congregation is made up mostly of aging Slavs and a trickle of curious converts, artists, old hippies, a young couple that found God through podcasts. On Sundays, incense swims through the nave like memory, and the candle flames flicker in rhythm with ancient chants. I was a man of deep belief, but not of visions. I held fast to liturgy, to scripture, to structure. My sermons were deliberate and measured. No hysteria. No prophecy. Faith was, to me, not a blaze, but a stone, cool, solid, eternal. Until one frostbitten Thursday morning in February. The day began with the ordinary. I woke early, as I always do. Made my single cup of black coffee. Crossed myself before stepping out onto the cold porch of the rectory, which stands just 20 feet behind the church. Mist hovered low over the pine woods, and the sky was a bruised, metallic gray. Everything was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own blood move. I was scheduled to meet with a young man named Jesse, a new member of the church, a former army medic who had recently returned from a long tour in Syria. He'd been suffering from night terrors, sleepwalking into the woods behind his house. His wife, frightened, had asked if I would speak with him. But Jesse didn't show up. Instead, I waited. I lit the sanctuary candles, walked through the nave slowly, praying the Jesus prayer under my breath. And that's when I noticed something strange. A smell. Not incense. Not wax. Something acrid, faint, but unmistakable. Burned paper. Or no, burned wood. Old. Like ash from a pyre. I checked the narthex. The candles. Even the old storage closet behind the altar. Nothing. No sign of fire. And then I saw it. On the pews, third row from the back, a thin layer of gray dust, like cigarette ash. Just there. Nowhere else. I touched it. Warm. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone burned trash nearby. Maybe it had blown in. Maybe I was just being paranoid. The mind loves drama where there is none. But something in my gut twisted. A cold awareness. I'd never smelled anything like it in that church before. I knelt at the altar and prayed harder than I had in months. But my prayer didn't rise. It felt stuck, like sound inside a sealed box. The silence around me had grown heavier. Thicker. And then, I swear to you on every icon I've ever kissed, I heard a breath. Right behind me. Not loud. Not human. Dry. Hollow. Like someone breathing through old bone. I turned sharply, nothing. But in the candlelight, the icon of Christ Pantocrator above the altar seemed different. His eyes, which always followed the room with that strange Orthodox stillness, looked away. Not at me. Past me. Towards something behind. I stood, heart thudding, and reached to relight the candle before the icon. My hand shook. Just slightly. And that's when the door to the church creaked open. I turned, half expecting Jessie. But instead, a woman stood there. Tall. Pale. Wearing a long gray coat that looked almost wet. Her face, angular and gaunt, was framed by dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. I didn't recognize her. She stepped inside, closed the door, and without greeting, walked slowly toward the front pew. Then she spoke. "He's going to show you the throne, Father." Her voice was dry, as if unused. "But first," she said, turning her head ever so slightly, "you'll have to die." I stared at her. She smiled faintly. And before I could utter a single word, she turned, and walked out the side door into the forest. I ran after her, but outside there was no one. Only mist. Pines. And the faint smell of burning ash, lingering like a warning. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes I saw her, that woman in the gray coat, standing in the nave like a figure in an old photograph, too still to be real. Her words repeated in my head, looping like a cursed litany. He's going to show you the throne, but first you'll have to die. Not. You might. Not. You could. You will. There are things I could dismiss. Delusions. Stress. Hallucinations. I'm not naive. I've counseled men unraveling at the edge of their minds. I know what madness smells like, and it's not ash and candle wax. This was different. Something had opened. By morning, the forest behind the church was shrouded in a thin, unnatural fog. As I stepped onto the porch of the rectory, I noticed the frost had formed a perfect cross on my window. I scraped it off with my sleeve, but the shape remained faintly etched in the glass, like it had grown from within. At 9 a.m., I called Jesse. No answer. I texted him, "You all right?" No response. At noon, I called his wife, Mari. She sounded strained. "He's not sleeping," she said. "He talks in his sleep now. Latin, I think. He never learned Latin, did he?" I paused. "No," I said quietly. "Not that I know of." "And something else," she added. "There was ash on his pillow. Twice now. It's not from the fireplace." I checked. My spine stiffened. "Mari," I said, "listen to me. Don't let him sleep alone. Not tonight." "What do you mean?" "Just trust me." A pause. "You saw something, didn't you?" I didn't answer. That evening, I walked the perimeter of the church. The woods whispered with wind, but underneath it, I could hear something else, chanting. Faint. Like voices under the earth. I found myself standing behind the altar, drawn there without thought. There's a trapdoor that leads to a narrow crawl space beneath the sanctuary, a relic from when the church was built during the Cold War, meant as a tornado shelter or worse. I'd never opened it before. But now, my hand moved like it was following an ancient command. The metal latch groaned. The trapdoor lifted with a breath of stale, warm air. Not cold, as it should have been. Inside, darkness. Not just absence of light. A presence of dark. I lowered myself into the space, flashlight in hand. The beam quivered across dirt walls, rusted tools, discarded hymnals. But then it caught something strange, a shape, scratched into the earth. I moved closer. A circle. Inside it, a crude drawing, a man on a throne. Crowned. Smiling. But the face was wrong. Too long. The eyes too wide. And behind the throne, shadowy wings stretched, not angelic, but insectoid. Segmental. Alien. I recoiled. And then, a sound. Breathing. Not mine. Something exhaled in the pitch behind me. I turned the flashlight fast, but it died in my hand. Snapped to black. Then a whisper, from behind my ear. "You're almost there, Elijah." The voice was hers. The woman in the gray coat. But I didn't see her. Only the black. And the ash, slowly, slowly drifting down like snowfall in a void. I scrambled out of the crawl space, panting. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would shatter my ribs. I slammed the trapdoor and locked it with shaking hands. Outside, the wind howled like something alive. But through the sound, I heard church bells. Distant. Impossible. Our bells hadn't worked in over a year. And yet they rang. Calling me. Warning me. Counting something down. Back inside the rectory, I poured a glass of water with trembling fingers. It smelled faintly of smoke. I didn't drink it. Instead, I sat in the darkness of my study, lit only by a candle. I opened the book of Revelation. And I read until I reached it. "And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority." Revelation 13 verse 2. The seat. The throne. Was that what she meant? Is that what I was going to be shown? And if so, who or what sat on it? I woke at 3:03 a.m. to the sound of bells. Not in my dream, outside. Real. Cold. Sharp as nails on glass. The church bell tower. Long dead. Rusted shut. The gears had frozen 2 winters ago, and we never had the money to repair it. No one could have rung it. But now it chimed. 3 slow peals. Then silence. I sat up in bed, heart thudding. The room was dark, but not empty. The shadows near my bookshelf didn't sit right, as though something stood among them, watching me without breath. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I simply whispered, "In the name of Jesus Christ." The shape flickered. Collapsed inward like smoke in reverse. Gone. I threw on my coat and stepped out into the frostbitten air. The night had teeth. Wind dragged through the trees like claws across silk. The sky was cloudless now, stars sharp and too still, not twinkling. Watching. St. Bartholomew stood in silence, its cross silhouetted against the pale orange haze of distant streetlights. But the bell tower door was open. Ajar. I walked toward it, each step sinking in the brittle grass. The ladder inside was ancient, iron, bolted into the stone. It shouldn't have held my weight, but it did. As I climbed, something foul wafted down, not rot, not sulfur, but something older. A smell like dust from an unsealed tomb. At the top, the bell hung motionless. Still rusted. Still bound in place. But there, on the platform beneath it, sat a bird. Black. Immobile. No, not a bird. A raven made of ash, its body crumbling gently in the wind, but never falling apart completely. It turned its head toward me, empty eye sockets glinting with unseen light, and then opened its beak. No sound came out. But I heard a whisper. "You are not the first, Elijah." I staggered back, nearly fell. My foot caught a loose rung. I descended fast, too fast, landing hard on the cold earth with the taste of copper in my mouth. I looked up. The bell tower was closed again. And I realized I had never opened it. At sunrise, I drove to Jessie's house. Mari met me at the door. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, eyes red, her left hand clutching a rosary that didn't belong to any Orthodox tradition. Just beads worn by grief. "He's worse," she said. Inside, the house felt hollow. Like a shell around something else. There were Bibles stacked in strange places, on the floor, under windows, near doors. As if to hold something in, not out. Jessie was in the bedroom, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Eyes wide open. Hands in his lap. And around him, on the carpet, was a perfect circle of ash. Mari whispered, "It just appeared." I stepped in cautiously. Jessie looked up at me, slowly, like a man rising from a depth of water. "Father," he said, voice rasping. "I saw it." "What?" I asked. "The throne. I saw it too." He told me his dream, if it was a dream. He said he'd been standing in an endless cathedral, walls of bone, columns of flame. There were no windows, only mirrors. And in each mirror, he saw himself, kneeling, chained, wearing vestments made of skin. At the center of the cathedral was the throne, vast, jagged, made of black stone, pulsing like a heart. Upon it sat a figure with no face, only a screen, like an old television, where static flickered endlessly. "It spoke to me through silence," Jessie whispered. And I understood. Understood what? He looked at me then, his eyes hollow but alert. Like something ancient was using his voice. "That worship without truth is just hunger. That the church can become a mouth that eats its own." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. Folded old. I opened it. A single sentence was scribbled in rough pen. "He who sits in gold may carry no soul." Before I could ask where it came from, Jessie collapsed. He didn't lose consciousness, not entirely. But his body seized, and a thin stream of gray ash poured from his mouth, pooling into the same perfect circle around his body. Mari screamed. I called 911. That night, back in the rectory, I prayed harder than ever before. Not with words, with teeth clenched, fists digging into the floorboards, a prayer born of desperation, not discipline. And I asked, for the first time, Lord, are you still here? And somewhere behind my closed eyes, in the space between heartbeats, I felt someone watching me. But it didn't feel like love. The next morning, the icons were changed. I didn't notice it at first. I had returned from the hospital after checking on Jesse. He was stable, sedated, and under psychiatric observation. The doctors couldn't explain the asphyxiation without obstruction, nor the ash under his fingernails, nor the strange black lesions that appeared briefly along his ribs, then vanished. When I returned to the church, something felt displaced. The air inside the sanctuary wasn't still, it was waiting. I crossed myself, as I always do, and lit the vigil candles in front of the iconostasis. But when I looked up at the central panel, the icon of the Theotokos holding the infant Christ, I froze. Her eyes were gone. Not gouged. Not defaced. Just gone. Smooth where the paint should have been. The shape remained, but the eyes were now blank ovals of pale gold, as if never painted at all. I moved to the next panel. Christ Pantocrator. Same thing. No eyes. My hands trembled as I ran through the church, checking each icon. Saints. Angels. The harrowing of Hades. Even the small icon of St. Bartholomew tucked near the sacristy. All of them eyeless. Only one icon remained untouched. A small, faded image of St. John the Theologian, high above the rear of the nave, nearly forgotten. He stared down at me with solemn eyes, but his mouth was gone. Eyes present. Mouth sealed. I stepped back, and a strange vertigo overtook me. The sanctuary seemed to sway, like it was a ship adrift in some invisible sea. I fell to my knees. And suddenly, the floor beneath me was not wood. It was stone. Cold. Black. Veined with glowing cracks that pulsed like veins. I looked up. I was no longer in St. Bartholomew's. I was in the cathedral Jesse described. The ceiling soared impossibly high, ribbed with what looked like spinal columns. Candles burned in the walls, not wax candles, but living flames trapped in glass skulls. The air was heavy with incense, but the scent was wrong, not frankincense. Embers and sorrow. I could hear chanting. A liturgy in a language I didn't recognize, not Greek, not Latin. Something older. The sound was beautiful and horrifying, like a choir of weeping angels reciting a funeral mass in reverse. At the far end of the black nave sat the throne. And upon it a figure. Tall. Crowned. Dressed in gold. His vestments shimmered unnaturally, as if stitched from mirrors. His hands were folded, fingers far too long, knuckles like hinges. But his face was a mask. Not metal. Not flesh. A shifting surface, like a live feed of static and fire, flickering symbols I couldn't read. And beneath it, a sense of something that was not a man. Not even a demon. A thing that feeds on worship. I wanted to run, but I could not move. And then the figure turned its mask toward me, and in a voice like wind over bones it spoke. They kneel to my image. But my image was taken. My throne is not empty. Your church knows this. My throat closed. I could not speak. I could not pray. The words caught like thorns in my mouth. The throne pulsed with heat. And then, without warning, the figure split open. Its golden vestments cracked down the center, revealing an empty chest cavity where a nest of black moths swarmed, each with tiny icons for wings, icons without eyes. They flew toward me. I screamed. I woke on the sanctuary floor, coughing, my cassock drenched in sweat. The icons were normal again. Their eyes returned. All of them. But I knew it wasn't over. This wasn't a dream. This was a revelation. That evening, I began writing letters to other priests. Men I trusted. Men I had studied with at seminary. I told them only fragments of what I had seen, enough to test the waters. Most did not respond. But one did. Father Alexander, a monk now living in Arizona. His reply was just 2 sentences. Do not trust the thrones, even in heaven. Especially in heaven. Look to the east. I didn't understand it then. But I would. Because that night, as I sat in my study reading his letter by candlelight, the shadows behind me twisted, and from them stepped the woman in the gray coat once more. Only this time, she smiled with teeth. And said, You've seen the throne. Now I'll show you the name carved beneath it. She stood in the doorway like she'd never left. Same gray coat. Same dark hair, long and bone straight. Her face was sharper now, more angular, like the idea of a face, not a real one. Her smile cut the room. You remember me, she said. Not a question. I nodded slowly. You said I'd have to die first. You did. She stepped forward, heels silent against the wood. Just for a moment. You were gone long enough to be seen. By what? By him. I swallowed. My voice barely returned. Christ? She tilted her head. Something that wears his name. Just as the church wears his image. Just as others wear his approval. She raised her hand, long fingers, almost too long, and pointed at the candle burning on my desk. Look! I turned. The flame froze. Time seemed to still. And then the flame bent, unnaturally, and cast a shadow on the far wall that didn't match the candle. It was a throne again. Familiar now. The same from Jesse's vision. From mine. But beneath the throne, in that shadow, something scratched and moving. Like a name being endlessly carved and erased. I squinted, and for a moment, letters surfaced. Vladimir. The rest flickered. Sometimes RX. Sometimes Petrus. Once, and only once, Putin. I stared. No, I whispered. That doesn't make sense. That's politics. That's outside the church. That's earthly. The woman looked at me with something like pity. Or something older. You think heaven and hell care about borders? About elections? She stepped closer. Power is power. The beast wears many masks. Some kiss icons. Some carry nuclear codes. Some do both. My mouth went dry. Are you saying he's the Antichrist? She laughed. Gently. Like someone laughing at a child's math mistake. No. But he is a throne bearer. A what? One who warms the seat. One who builds the idea of worship, not for God, but for control. And control is always hungry. It always eats. She touched the candle. The flame flickered violently, then bent sideways again. This time the throne's shadow was surrounded by thousands. All kneeling. All blindfolded. They don't see whom they praise. Are they the faithful? They are what's left of them. She turned to me. And you, Elijah, you are still inside. You are a splinter in the seat. That's why he's showing you this. Who is he? Her smile faded. That's the question you must not ask. Not yet. Then the room collapsed. Not physically, but inward. Like space itself folded and inverted. 1 second I was standing in the study, the next I was beneath the earth. In a corridor lined with icons, but all of them had mirrored faces. I couldn't see Christ, Mary, or the saints, only myself, distorted and grinning, over and over. The corridor narrowed, chokingly tight. I crawled forward, breath ragged. My fingers touched the stone. It was warm. Alive. At the end of the corridor, another throne. Smaller. And above it, engraved in gold. The dwelling of God is with men. And beneath it, in crude carving. But the name changed. I reached out to touch the throne, and as my hand brushed it, I heard a scream. Distant, inhuman, and familiar. It was Jesse. I woke on the floor of the sanctuary, under the altar. Covered in ashes. Not gray, but black with gold flecks like burned icons. My fingers trembled as I looked at them. They were not mine. They were longer, paler. The fingers from the vision. That morning, the mail arrived. Among it was an envelope. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. A blurry image of the Kremlin, at night, but in the clouds above it, the clear outline of the same throne, carved from shadow. On the back of the photo, someone had scrawled in red ink, "Watch the east. The false kingdom is nearly crowned." I no longer knew who to trust. My church. My senses. Even my prayers felt thinner, like they were being intercepted. But I remembered Father Alexander's words. Do not trust the thrones. And I remembered the woman in the gray coat. The name changed. That night, I knelt before the iconostasis and prayed for blindness. Because the truth was becoming unbearable. But the answer I received was not silence. It was a whisper. Now that you've seen, you must speak. They came for me at dawn. 2 men. Suits, clean cuts, white smiles. Not FBI, too polished. Not local, too quiet. One flashed a badge I'd never seen before. No seal. No department. Just a triangle inside a circle, burned into a leather fold. Father Elijah Dorn? Yes. We'd like to ask you a few questions about a young man named Jesse Lang. I said nothing. I opened the door. They stepped inside like they'd already been there. One of them wandered toward the hallway where the icons hung. The other sat at my dining table and pulled out a small recorder, old, analog. The kind you don't see anymore. This is for your protection, he said, pressing record. Whose protection? I asked. He smiled. Yours, Father. And ours. And theirs. He gestured vaguely to the window, as if someone, or something, was watching through it. A wind passed. No cars. No birds. He leaned forward. Tell me about the throne. My hands clenched. I said nothing. But my skin crawled, because the moment he spoke that word, I knew he'd seen it too. Or something worse. He sighed when I didn't respond. You people are so difficult. Always waiting for fire from heaven when the fire's been in the walls all along. The man standing by the icons called out suddenly. Hey! This one's different. I turned. He was staring at the small icon of St. John the Theologian, the one whose mouth had vanished in the earlier vision. Now, his mouth had returned. But his eyes were gone. Reversed. I walked toward it slowly. My heart pounded with a strange rhythm. In the silence, I could hear a voice beneath the floorboards, whispering a language I didn't know but understood. The man by the icon turned to me and said, You're already preaching it, aren't you? I frowned. Preaching what? The Hollow King. My mouth went dry. He stepped closer. They all preach him eventually. Some just don't know whose name they're speaking. They left as quickly as they came. No threats. No arrests. Just smiles. And a final message. You'll hear from us again when he decides it's time. I sat in the sanctuary that evening, watching the candlelight flicker across the altar. But it wasn't peaceful. It was performative. Like something was watching me watch God. My thoughts returned to Jesse. To the ash. The circle. The throne. To the name beneath it. Putin. That night I dreamed again. Only this time, I stood not in the throne cathedral, but in a burned-out version of my own church. Walls charred. Roof collapsed. The altar shattered. And in place of the crucifix, a mirror. In it I saw myself, but older. Hollowed out. Wearing a crown of rust. I opened my mouth in the mirror. And in that same, guttural voice I'd heard before, the one Jesse spoke with, I said, The Hollow King rises not in violence, but in silence. In systems. In symbols. In gold. And the church? I whispered. The reflection smiled. The church adjusts. I woke in cold sweat. And something inside me broke. I took the icon of Christ from my prayer shelf and smashed it. Not out of blasphemy. Out of desperation. Out of the sickening sense that it no longer held the image of Christ, but a husk. Behind the shattered wood was something I had never placed there. A folded page. Ancient. Brittle. And on it a litany. Written in Greek and English. I read the English. Litany of the Hollow King. To be spoken at coronation, or upon the silence of God. Lord of mirrors, hear us. Lord of gold, guide us. He who sits unseen, we kneel beneath. Feed on fear. Feed on fame. Feed on our forgetting. In thy image we erase. In thy name we build thrones of ash. Hollow is the king. Hollow are we. The text ended in a bloodstain. I dropped the page. At that moment, a bell tolled once, from the tower. One single, flat note. And I knew what I had to do. I had to leave St. Bartholomew's. I packed that night. My old boots. My robe. My crucifix. The broken icon. The page. And a Bible, one I hadn't opened in years. My grandmother's. It had a name scrawled in the margins I'd never noticed until now. Vladimirovich. Before I left, I knelt at the altar one last time. I didn't pray. I listened. And from the walls I heard chanting. Not beautiful. Just hungry. I drove through the night westbound. Away from the church. Away from the men in suits. Away from the whispering walls. Every mile deeper into America felt like descending into the lungs of a sleeping giant, heavy, dark, breathing secrets. The sky was flat and starless. No moon. Just long black highways flanked by skeletal gas stations and ghost-light billboards that flickered messages I couldn't quite read. I stopped only once, in the middle of the New Mexico desert, near a town that didn't appear on the map. It was called Zara, spelled in crooked letters on a rusted road sign, half swallowed by dust. The only lit building was a church. I stepped inside. It was old, probably Baptist once, now stripped of any clear denomination. No cross. No iconostasis. Just bare wooden pews and a single altar with a mirror instead of a crucifix. At the back sat a man in black. He didn't move when I entered. Just raised one finger and pointed at the altar. "You've come far, Father," he said. His voice rasped like sand sliding over stone. "How do you know who I am? We all know you now. Word travels quickly between empty thrones." I approached cautiously. He was wearing a cassock, like mine, but darker, as though dyed with oil. His face was covered in fine, white dust. Even his eyelashes. "Are you clergy?" "Once," he said. "Now I am exarch." "Exarch of what?" He smiled with cracked lips. "Of what remains." He reached beneath the pew and pulled out a leather-bound book, fat and warped, humming softly. "You carry questions," he said. "But the answers are heavier than blood." He opened the book. Inside were pages filled with names. Thousands. Some written in ink, others burned in. One glowed faintly, Vladimirovich. "That one was not supposed to rise," he said, tracing it. "But hunger finds its own path." "Who is he?" I asked. "Why was his name beneath the throne?" The exarch turned toward me, and his eyes, white, blind, met mine with frightening precision. "Because he is not the beast. He is its translator." He tapped the mirror on the altar. "The Hollow King speaks in power. But it needs a human mouth. A hand. A myth. Your church gave him the words. Your nation gave him the silence. And your people, the people of icons and incense, gave him the liturgies." I stepped closer to the mirror. My reflection wavered. And in it, I saw Jesse, back in his hospital bed, eyes wide open, lips moving rapidly, as if in prayer. But the words he spoke weren't his. I leaned in and heard them. "Give us back the silence. Give us back the silence. Give us back the silence." The exarch spoke again. "That boy was a door. Nothing more. An accidental crack in the shell. You, Father Dorn, you're different. Why? Because you still think the throne is a metaphor. The walls around us shifted. Suddenly, the church was gone. We stood in a vast cathedral made of bone and glass. A city of saints crucified on scaffolds. Their mouths open in silent hymn. Their eyes burned out with golden nails. Above it all, the throne loomed again. But this time, it turned toward me. Not the figure. The throne itself, as if the seat was alive, and watching. And for the first time, I understood something terrible. It had no occupant. It never had. The figure I saw before, the gold vestments, the mask, was not a king. It was a puppet. A shell. A projected image made of memory, iconography, and nationalism. The throne ruled alone. It ruled through whoever sat on it. I fell to my knees. What do you want from me? I asked the exarch. He held out the book again. Read the last name. I looked down. It had not been there before. Dorn Elijah? Beneath it, a single phrase. Offer him the censer. Or become the smoke. The vision vanished. I was alone in the church in Seara. The exarch gone. The mirror cracked. Outside, the desert wind howled like a choir without tongues. I stumbled to the car and drove for hours without stopping, not even sure I was on real roads anymore. When I finally stopped, it was at an overlook facing east. The first pale streak of dawn touched the edge of the sky. And for a moment, in that colorless glow, I saw them again. The blind saints. The eyeless icons. Marching in silence. Toward a city made of smoke and glass. In my pocket, the litany burned against my chest like a brand. In thy name, we build thrones of ash. I crossed into Arizona with a fever in my blood. Not a medical one, a spiritual fever. Like I'd stared too long into something holy and wrong. My fingers twitched with invisible rhythm. The words of the litany spun in my mind, rearranging themselves in new and obscene orders. Hollow are we. In thy forgetting we remember. Blessed is the throne that prays. That line wouldn't leave me. What does it mean for a throne to pray? A seat cannot kneel. A seat cannot weep. Unless it does not worship God. Unless it worships itself. That thought led me to a monastery I hadn't visited in 15 years, tucked into a red canyon near Winslow. It had once been Greek Orthodox, then independent, then something stranger. I arrived near midnight. The gates were open. The courtyard was silent. Dozens of candles flickered in lanterns nailed to the trees, and in that glow, I saw something new carved into the monastery's ancient stone. And his throne shall pray. A brother in a hood met me beneath the arch. We knew you'd come, he said. Your name's been rising like smoke in the chants. I followed him in silence. The chapel was candlelit. No pews. No icons. Just one massive throne at the far end, made of welded gold coins, bones, and melted incense trays. It pulsed faintly, as if breathing. You pray to that? I asked, horrified. The monk didn't answer. He only began to chant. And the throne responded. It trembled. Then emitted a sound I cannot describe, like a cough, a sob, a tectonic hum. My knees buckled. My ears filled with a pressure like deep water. It doesn't worship God, I gasped. It worships prayer itself. Power. The act. Not the object. Exactly, the monk whispered. We built it that way. It amplifies devotion. It doesn't care who it's for. It just grows. I tried to back away, but the floor seemed sticky, liturgically sticky, if such a thing can exist. The words from the litany thrummed in my bones. In thy name, we build thrones of ash. This is ash, I said aloud. The monk turned to me, eyes wide. No. This is ash becoming fire. Suddenly I saw it, behind the throne, flickering in the candlelight. A mirror, half hidden. Just like in Seara. But this one was cracked, and bleeding. I moved closer. The monk made no effort to stop me. In the mirror, I didn't see myself. I saw Jesse again. Only now he was older, maybe 40. Dressed in black robes. Standing before a congregation of eyeless children, preaching the litany with passion. His voice layered, like 100 mouths behind his one. Behind him stood the throne, larger now. Towering. Crowned in flame. And someone was sitting in it. The figure turned. It had no face. Just a burning wound where the eyes should be, and from it poured a voice like radio static soaked in scripture. In silence you crown me. In silence I return. I screamed. The vision shattered. I lay on the chapel floor, surrounded by monks now, all chanting, faces vacant. Their mouths moved, but their eyes rolled back in rapture. I saw the truth, they were feeding it. Not with blood. Not with gold. But with belief. Blind belief. Every prayer they offered was a brick. Every act of reverence a chain. And I had done the same. Every Sunday sermon. Every ritual offered without question. Every time I praised the hierarchy over the heart. Every time I said yes when I should have said no. I had helped build this. I ran. Out of the chapel. Out of the monastery. Into the cold desert night. The stars had returned, but they looked different now. They were watching. And somewhere, far east, toward D.C., toward Moscow, toward somewhere older, I could feel the throne watching back. It didn't need to chase me. I was already carrying it. In the motel that night, I opened my grandmother's Bible again. The name Vladimirovich glowed faintly on the inner margin. I flipped forward. And in the book of Revelation, someone had drawn a small, detailed symbol beside the beast. A throne with 3 heads. A crown. A priest's mitre. A gas mask. Beneath it, in trembling pen. He comes in systems, not skin. And I finally understood. The Hollow King was not a man. He was a structure. A god made of politics, power, piety, built when we kneel not to truth, but to fear disguised as faith. And Putin? Just a mouth. A vessel. A temporary name on the ever-growing list of translators. Like Saul. Like Caiaphas. Like Constantine. A new name will come next. And the throne will pray again. The road west ended in a town that did not exist. No GPS signal. No signs. Only the name whispered in the desert wind as if memory itself had a pulse. Poseidon. It was not on any map. I had driven for hours through sun-bleached nothing before I saw it, a grid of perfectly symmetrical streets, all empty. Street lamps flickered without power. Churches stood on every block, each with the same locked doors and unlit crosses. There were no people. Only mirrors. Hung on walls. Standing in windows. Buried into sidewalks. Each one reflecting a different version of myself. In one, I was a bishop. In another, a soldier. In another, a child, eyes burned out and mouth sewn shut with rosary beads. Every reflection whispered. You already sat down. You were there when he arrived. The throne prays through you. At the center of Poseidon stood a cathedral with no doors, only a single stair descending into darkness. The moment I stepped onto it, I felt a presence, something vast and patient. Like a beast too large for light. I descended with the litany in one hand and my grandmother's Bible in the other. Each step downward, the words of the text rearranged themselves. He who is worshipped becomes what is worshipped. A throne, once crowned, never hungers alone. The tunnel widened into a subterranean sanctuary carved from stone and old steel. Candles floated in the air, flickering in no wind. The altar was a mass of wires, ossified scripture, and shattered weaponry. Behind it stood a man. No, a figure. Wearing a robe of flags. Wearing a crown made of eyes. Hundreds of them. Human eyes. Still wet. Still blinking. Staring in all directions. He turned. Welcome, Father Elijah, he said in a voice that was not his own. It echoed in at least 4 accents. Russian. American. Latin. And something older. Who are you? I whispered. I am the final reflection. I am the silence you've prayed to all your life. He gestured to the crown. These are the witnesses. Every soul who saw the throne and chose to look away. I fell to my knees, dizzy. Why show me this? I asked. Because you were never meant to be a priest. You were meant to be a translator. He stepped closer. The eyes on the crown blinked in unison. The throne never needed kings. Only interpreters. Faithful scribes. Prophets of infrastructure. Apostles of inertia. I refuse, I said. I won't speak for it. He smiled. The smile didn't reach his real face, only echoed across the mirrors lining the chamber. You already have. Every Sunday. Every silent nod. Every time you let power go unchecked because it wore a liturgical vestment. Suddenly, the chamber vanished, and I stood on the steps of St. Bartholomew's again. But the sky was red. The air pulsed. And thousands of people stood in the streets, all facing the church. Their faces were gone. Wiped clean. No mouths. No eyes. Just smooth skin and Bibles pressed to their chests like badges. A single voice thundered from the tower. The throne is hungry! The crowd chanted in response. Feed it faith. Feed it fear. Feed it flesh. I awoke in a motel bathtub, trembling. My Bible had been opened beside me. A new passage underlined in red, one I didn't mark. And the beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42 months. Revelation 13 verse 5. And beside it, someone, or something, had written, This is not prophecy. This is schedule. Outside, dawn broke. I stepped into the parking lot, heart racing. And on every car window was my reflection, wearing the crown of eyes. The sky above Washington, D.C., was a bruised purple, the color of bruises you don't feel until days later. I stood before the cathedral steps of the nation's capital, clutching the tattered page of the litany, my fingers shaking. Behind me, the streets churned with silent crowds, faces blank as porcelain, eyes empty wells reflecting nothing but themselves. They moved like marionettes, pulled by an unseen hand, offering no prayers, only hollow echoes of faith. I had arrived at the final threshold. Inside the cathedral, the air was thick with incense, but the scent was wrong. It was acrid, like burning paper mixed with something metallic, blood or rust. At the altar stood a figure in golden vestments, its face masked by a crucifix of glass. The throne behind him was empty, but the room pulsed with power, not divine, but manufactured. I stepped forward. The figure turned. Its voice was a chorus of shadows. Father Elijah, you have returned. Who are you? I demanded. I am the voice of the throne. The sum of the liturgies you whispered into silence. The shadow behind power. The hunger beneath faith. You speak of Putin. Of the church. Of the throne. Yes. The throne feeds on both, politics and piety entwined. They build it with fear, crown it with obedience, and feed it with forgetting. The figure lifted a hand, and the walls shimmered, revealing images. Cities burning in quiet conformity. Priests blessing tanks. Crowds kneeling before screens flickering with propaganda. The voice continued. You saw Jesse's eyes. You heard the litany. But you failed to see the price. What price? The silence. The silence? The silence that speaks. I realized then, the throne was not empty. It was waiting. Waiting for the next translator. The next vessel. Me. I fell to my knees, heartbreaking. The figure extended a censer filled with dark smoke. Offer it, it commanded. Or become the smoke. I closed my eyes. For a moment, all was void. Then a voice, not from the figure, but within me. Soft, persistent, and full of light. Remember who you serve. I opened my eyes and threw the censer aside. The smoke burst into flames. Holy fire. The figure screamed, dissolving into shards of glass and light. The crowd outside gasped. Eyes returned to faces. Mouths whispered prayers once lost. I stood alone on the altar, trembling. The throne was empty again. But now I knew the truth. The throne is made not of power or fear, but of our own silence. And the greatest prayer we can offer is to speak.